So I don't know who at Atlus looked at XCOM, a tactical RPG about preventing an alien invasion, and said, you know what, that sure looks like a great template for the next entry in the Persona franchise. But whoever did think of it first, I'd like to shake their hand, because I can pretty safely say that having been the main story of Persona 5 Tactica, this game has fully changed my tune on the merit of Persona 5 spin-off titles moving forward. But before we get any further, we are going to be giving away one copy of Persona 5 Tactica to one of you guys who are watching this video. So make sure to stay to the end of the video to learn more about how you can enter into this giveaway. This video is going to be broken up into two segments. One, where I talk about my experience without story spoilers, short of what's been revealed in the trailers, and one where I give all of my thoughts regarding the events of the game. And so, time codes for both of these sections are on screen now. Now, if you're not familiar with what Persona 5 Tactica is all about, essentially the story takes place sometime after the events of Persona 5, but prior to the events of Strikers, and the core foundation of the game is that the Phantom Thieves we all know and love get transported back into the metaverse, but this time around, instead of being taken to a palace like Persona 5, or a jail like in Strikers, they are transported into an entire kingdom that is controlled by a tyrannical ruler named Marie, who's oppressing her citizens in order to prepare for the perfect wedding. And it's in this first portion of the game that we are introduced to two of the game's new characters, Erina and Toshiro Kasukabe. And let me tell you, these characters have easily grown to become two of my favorites in the entire Persona franchise. And as someone who makes a lot of videos about characters in the Persona franchise, their psychology, and why I enjoy them, this is the highest praise that I can personally give them for what that's worth. The care and attention that these two get throughout the course of the narrative is something that I absolutely adore. However, I can't help but mention that because these two get so much care and attention from the main narrative, this does have the side effect of leaving the Phantom Thieves themselves in kind of a weird place. If you are coming into this game looking for a lot of character growth and development from your favorite Phantom Thief Morgana, as we all were, then I'm sorry to disappoint you, but you're not gonna get much of it. The Phantom Thieves and their interactions with each other and their new party members are admittedly very in character, but what makes these characters who they are never really gets challenged. They have some incredible character moments throughout the game, with one character in particular getting some well-deserved spotlight, who I think I'm gonna keep to myself for sake of not leading the witness. I don't have to. I could be awful and spoil the whole game right now, but I won't. But I could. But I won't. Ultimately, the Phantom Thieves are more so positioned in this game as the knowing guides to Erina and Toshiro as a way to bolster these new additions and the development of their characters. And so this poses the question, does this take away from the game? And for me, no, I don't think so. In fact, I think that this approach actually works heavily in the game's favor. If you've played Persona 5 Royal, Persona 5 Strikers, Persona Q2, Persona 5 Dancing in Starlight, and even maybe the original Persona 5, then you have likely spent hundreds of hours with these characters already. Having them be the experienced metaverse travelers that they are kind of makes sense based on the rapport we as the player already have with them. But they also don't lean so heavily into the past that this game would be inaccessible for newcomers, which, again, I think it works so well to the game's benefit. Add into the fact that because it's in the middle of the story that Persona 5 Strikers finishes, means that they can't really develop the Phantom Thieves past how they've already developed in that game. The game respects and acknowledges the source material that we already have, giving players who have played these games the opportunity to say,
I understood that reference,
without making it a requirement to enjoy the game. I genuinely don't think that there was a single moment during my playthrough where I felt like the game didn't know exactly what it was trying to say, and I really respect and enjoy that. This idea of exploring a kingdom also provides a good backdrop for what the story is trying to say, with the natural evolution of the rebellion that we are so familiar with from Persona 5 evolving into a full-on revolution stoked by by Erina and the rest of the Rebel Corps starting straight from the get-go. While the story is presented more as a visual novel with beautifully illustrated backdrops depending on where a scene is taking place, I think that Atlus was able to really get the most out of this medium of storytelling, with there being several moments throughout the course of the game that had me gasping and at the edge of my seat, even though the fully rendered cutscenes only occur in very key moments throughout the story. But if the story's great, then don't get me started on the gameplay. Now, when the game was announced, I was unsure whether or not they would be able to pull off good tactical gameplay, because while making an okay tactical RPG is pretty difficult, making a great one is a monumental task. And while Persona 5 Tactica by no means is a genre-defining game, it certainly blew my personal expectations way out of the water, with its smooth, well-thought-out maps, pretty seamless gameplay that was intuitive but not mindless. If you have any experience with tactical RPGs and you want a semblance of a challenge, you should definitely go with the higher difficulties. I can't really think of a single time during the main story that I had much of any trouble with any of the maps playing on normal. The game just gives your character so many survivability options that once you're decently familiar with the mechanics of the combat system and how to best position your units by cover whenever possible, so you either reduce or fully block any incoming damage, it's almost kinda hard to get a game over, because even if one unit dies, another one can just immediately switch in, and depending on your difficulty setting, you get more and more units who can jump in from the back lines. Difficulty settings aside though, it's a pretty cool, fun system that makes you want to take you and your enemy's surroundings into account in order to finish a map as effectively as possible and get all of the possible rewards offered by completing sub-objectives on each map, which when you complete all 3 sub-objectives, I don't know, it scratches a very specific itch in my brain. And like I said, while the main scenario missions didn't pose much of a threat on the normal difficulty, I will say that some of the side missions would provide some of the most fun and engaging brain teasers that forced me to engage with all of the game's mechanics to their fullest in order to complete them in the way that they're intended. Whether it's learning how to best position your units to trigger an all-out attack that encompasses every enemy on the map after abusing the once more mechanic that triggers after every time you knock down an enemy, therefore allowing you to move and attack again, or physically attacking enemies to knock them into better positions, or using height to better the position of your units on the battlefield, pretty much each of these side missions will force you to learn more and more about how the game should be played optimally over time. And then this knowledge will be challenged, admittedly to a lesser degree, in the main story. While narratively, these quests help give some context to the story towards the beginning of the game, they serve more as a vessel for fun and entertaining conversations, with the occasional quest giving you some character insights or some insightful narrative beats. They're also incredibly useful for getting a boatload of growth points, or GP, and helpful personas that you can equip to your units, which I've got to say, the character customization in this game is so very satisfying. I loved pairing Yusuke, who could do a pretty satisfying amount of damage while also being able to move incredibly far early in the game across the map, especially if you focus on improving his movement as quickly as you can, with Ryuji, who by contrast is a bulky heavy hitter who had my favorite voltage ability in the game in Brigantine Blitzkrieg. This skill sees Captain Kid do an immense amount of damage to any enemies in his path, with Ryuji being able to attack these enemies from all the way across the map if he wants to, as long as they're on the same level as him and within eyesight. Even if he doesn't kill the enemies, he will still leave them stunned and vulnerable, being fodder for once mores. Add on to this that elemental damage doesn't have a chance to cause a status effect in Tactica, it just causes a status effect in Tactica. Guaranteed. And the more targets you can hit in a turn, the more quickly you can recharge the voltage gauge so that Ryuji can use his Brigantine Blitzkrieg again. Really, if you keep him positioned right, this can turn into a pretty mercilessly effective cycle. And because of how varied each of the units and their skill sets are, regardless of your playstyle or the context of the map, you should be able to create a party that works well pretty easily. My core 3 throughout the majority of the game, if you couldn't tell, were Ren, Ryuji, in Yusuke, occasionally subbing in Haru if I want to do more damage at the expense of mobility, or I would use Morgana for his insane mobility at the expense of dealing huge damage. Pair this with the fact that in this game, the Velvet Room, by some magical twist of fate, allows everyone to be able to equip an extra persona on top of their base persona that can add up to 2 sub-skills, whether they be spells like Bufu, or a passive ability like Heavenly Gift, which allows you to greatly increase the amount of voltage gained, as well as the fact that these secondary personas can affect the party members they're equipped to's stats. This lends itself to a very satisfying and fun customization system, so you literally can build your party as intentionally and as directly correlated to how you want to play as you possibly can, which on the higher difficulties is essential, and on the lower difficulties helps you pretty easily snap the main scenario in half, which I love. If there's anything I can say that's negative about the game's combat, it's that the enemy variety isn't awesome. You get a small handful of enemy types that you have to deal with throughout the entirety of the game, and it really feels like such a rinse repeat at times, with the intelligent map design really being what ensures you don't get too bored as you progress through the game, with there being more and more map mechanics that are introduced to keep you on your toes, to make sure that each area feels distinct. So, to round out the non-spoiler section, the only thing that I haven't really talked much about yet is the UI and the music. I'm no professional when talking about this kind of stuff, so if your opinion differs from my own, then, well, that's fair enough. But I really dig the UI in this game. It's not quite as satisfying as Royal or Strikers, but that doesn't mean it isn't still incredibly good. With the prep and hideout menus being inspired by Soviet revolutionary posters, being a really cool and stylish detail that just ties it all together, constantly evoking that feeling of revolution with every little detail, even when they really didn't have to. And they do all of this without sacrificing the trademark Persona 5 look and feel to everything. And as far as the music goes, I would say it definitely doesn't have the upbeat earworms of Royal or Strikers. And of the 3, I'd say it's probably my least favorite soundtrack. But that doesn't mean it isn't still really good. Like the song Our Revolution that plays at the very beginning of the game on the title screen just brings me nothing but comfort and joy whenever I boot up the game. And Tactica's version of Beneath the Mask will be on my video game playlist for the foreseeable future. And honestly, while I don't think that the tunes are as distinctive in this game, I think that's just boiled down to the fact that this game was trying to go for a more low-key vibe to evoke the feelings that they wanted to during combat in cutscenes. And I think this music served its purpose well, even if it isn't my favorite. With all of that said though, the intro song Revolution in Your Heart will forever be a banger, and I will not take opposing opinions on this matter. When it comes down to it, this feels like a very intentionally made game that tells a very focused and well thought out story. Clearly, the developers had an idea for a story focused around these new characters, and the Phantom Thieves that we all know and love were our vessels to getting to experience this story. That has an incredible amount of heart to it, and after having reflected on the game for a little bit after beating it, this may very well be one of my favorite Persona stories to date. The only way I wouldn't recommend this game to someone who likes Persona is if they absolutely loathe tactical RPGs, in which case I would still at least recommend looking into the story or watching a playthrough or watching a Twitch stream, because I genuinely believe that it is that good. With that being said though, like with any Persona game, it's kind of a slow start and doesn't really pick up until after the first major boss fight. I don't know, prior to this game coming out, I was very much in the camp that Persona 5 needs to stop releasing spin-off titles. And while I would probably prefer a new cast of characters to get to know at this point, I'll admit I have changed my tune after this game based on how incredibly well they are able to flesh out the stories of these new characters. This self-contained side story gave me enough of the Phantom Thieves that I felt satisfied, but it never tried to reinvent them as characters, which I'm alright with. So while the Phantom Thieves do have a lot of really amazing moments throughout the game, the point of this story was never to build them up further, just expand them out more than we've already gotten. But that's all I can really say about my thoughts surrounding the game without getting too much into firm spoiler territory. So if you want to avoid spoilers at all costs, but still want to participate in our Persona 5 Tactica giveaway, skip to the timecode on the screen right now to get more information on that. But if you want to hear my spoiler-filled thoughts because you either also finished the game, or you're a rebel and don't care if you get the game spoiled for you, then keep listening. Alright, so let's just address the elephant in the room right now. Toshiro Kasukabe and his characterization are so well done in this game, and I think that having him be the focal point of the entire narrative is the best course of action that Atlus could have taken with this spin-off. As I was playing through it, all I could think was that this is what it would have looked like if Futaba's Palace had been given an entire game solely dedicated to it. Toshiro is a man who has dealt with an incredible amount of pain and sorrow in his past, and the game does not shy away from sharing this with us in no uncertain terms. So while the amnesiac protagonist is a trope that is played out a bit at this point, I've gotta say I actually really love how it's used to serve the narrative and slowly build intrigue as we go throughout the story of this game, with every kingdom representing some aspect of Toshiro's life that he wanted to repress or hide from himself to some capacity. The first kingdom focuses entirely on Marie, a cruel ruler whose only desire is to have the perfect wedding. She doesn't care who it's with. She doesn't care that she's marrying Toshiro. All she cares about is the perks after getting married, and will make the citizens of her kingdom miserable to get those perks. I feel like this kingdom in particular is one that I enjoyed because it safeguards the reveals of the rest of the game behind this deceivingly silly antagonist and plot. Having the ruler be this deranged, wedding-obsessed dictator that sees her subjects as beneath her, or as she would so eloquently put it, the pores, who are meant to serve as tools to accomplish her goals, with the primary form of resistance being these little dudes with top hats for heads and their leader, Erina. I've heard online that this first area was kind of a turnoff for some people with how unserious it felt, but with the revelation that Marie is actually Toshiro's real-life fiance, whom he really holds nothing but negative feeling towards, I can't exactly blame him for wanting to repress the memories, both of this and the next two kingdoms. In fact, this recontextualization of what's happening and who Marie really is makes this whole area a bit unsettling on repeat playthroughs. After this, we see him encounter his two-faced controlling father and the vice principal who he and his dear friend Eri Natsuhara had gotten thrown out of school, all the while uncovering deeply distressing memories that Toshiro didn't want to remember, like how he blames himself for the death of his mother, and Eri getting injured by being pushed in front of a train by the vice principal, whom they had gotten ousted. It all serves to really build this intrigue in us as the players and make us want to learn more, not only about Toshiro as a character, but also Erina, who throughout the course of the game after the first kingdom begins to struggle with who and what she really is. Is she her own person, like Toshiro and the rest of the Phantom Thieves, or is she just another mental construct within Toshiro's mind? It's a really interesting arc for her, especially as we begin to learn about Eri Natsuhara and see flashbacks of her influence and her relationship with Toshiro when he was much younger. We see that she is the person that first inspired him to take a stand in what he believes in and rebel against the status quo of their school, and clearly she has left an impact on him as she is the symbol of rebellion and revolution in his mind's eye, in all of these kingdoms in his mental world. There's nothing in this game's story that feels purposeless or like they were just trying to pad out the runtime. And the amount of times that the reveals made me viscerally gasp is insane. Like, when I saw that Eri, after they had completed their rebellion in front of the school, was pushed in front of that train, and then we see that at least she survived, but that the major injuries she had suffered were her right eye and her left leg, I fully freaked out because in Erina's design, her right eye is always covered by her hair and her left leg is armored. What was seemingly just a design choice by Atlus to make the character look cool is actually Toshiro's mind very intentionally guarding him from the injuries he had seen her sustain firsthand, which we would see much more viscerally towards the end of the game when we would eventually have to fight his mental construct of Eri herself that the shadow version of Toshiro had summoned. It's so incredibly well done, and even with the visual novel style of storytelling that Atlus presents in this game, they are able to still successfully utilize show don't tell storytelling beats. And while I could make entire videos on both Erina and Toshiro, dissecting everything about their characters, and who knows, I might just do that, I feel like I can really sum up their stories with one word: impact. At the end of the Third Kingdom, when we discovered that the true ruler of the kingdom is in fact not Vice Principal Nakabachi, but Toshiro himself, while it wasn't the most stunning revelation in the world, I think it was a fantastic and very Persona 4-esque moment of self-discovery and acceptance within Toshiro. The thing that he has been most afraid of to confront over anything else, whether it be Marie, Nakabachi, even his father, is himself. And so when Erina is placed in danger, this is when Toshiro finally resolves once and for all to stand for what is right. And we see him awaken to his persona, which ends up being Erina herself, though now she goes by the name Ernesto. The impact this moment had on me could not be understated, because whereas in Persona 4, we only had an isolated portion of the game to see the cast move through the TV world and confront their shadow selves, Tactica shows an amazing amount of restraint to not have Toshiro actually awaken to his persona until such a late stage in the game, when up to this point, they were alluding much more heavily to the idea that it would be Erina that would awaken to her persona first, with her even talking with Joker about what it takes to summon one, practicing as early as the First Kingdom in order to try and get the hang of it. It's this restraint of suddenly having a fourth unit to use in the last set of maps, who is pretty alright all things considered, even though he can't physically attack or use a firearm, that really makes the reveal feel earned and like it's a reward for him making so much progress to not only confront his memories and these terrible aspects of his past self, but also overcome them. My only gripe is that I wish he could have kept the mask. Maybe gotten a Phantom Thief costume. I think that would have been pretty cool. I accept that they kept him in the suit, but I would have liked to see a Phantom Thief Toshiro. I know that it's his own mind, so he doesn't really need to hide. Would have been cool though, but I digress. So the question is, with every kingdom being entirely built off of the foundation of Toshiro's life and experiences, what role did the Phantom Thieves actually have to play in the story? It's a pretty good question, and one that I've been trying to come up with a good answer for myself. Something that I've caught myself saying is that this game could have happened with any cast of Persona characters, and it would have looked pretty much the same. But the more I thought about it, the less I believed this. While the Phantom Thieves have less individual impact on the story, like they do in Royal or Strikers, I don't think that this game would have had the same feeling with another cast of characters. Awakening to your true self is nothing new to the Persona franchise, but typically it's a pretty straightforward process, all things considered. Be presented with a life-shattering challenge, face the adversity head-on, have a revelation about oneself, and in the case of Persona 5, have a drive to rebel against the status quo, rinse, repeat. This game takes place after the fall of this thing right here. It takes place after this thing died at the end of Persona 5. And so I think that the strength and the presence that the Phantom Thieves bring to this game that no other characters simply could have subbed in for is the way in which they have grown throughout the course of Persona 5 that allows them to successfully act more like mentors to Toshiro and Erina as they travel throughout all of the kingdoms, slowly learning about Toshiro's past. While I could go in depth into how each of them do this, and not every Phantom Thief is written equally well, with Makoto being the character who I think, in my personal opinion, gets the least meaningful screen time, with her role as the brains and the tactician of the operation satisfying ending, verbed in its entirety by Toshiro. The rest of the cast did have some really fantastic moments in which they can relate their own experiences to what Toshiro may be feeling at the time. While examples of this are littered throughout the game, like Yusuke relating to having a father figure who used him, or Haru sympathizing with the difficulties of an arranged marriage, which, while they don't specifically dive into the details of their own experiences, as long as we, the players, are familiar with their backgrounds, we can pretty easily connect the dots of where these characters are coming from. But above all else, I think that Futaba is given multiple fantastic moments to shine in support of Toshiro, with one that particularly stood out to me coming towards the end of the Second Kingdom when she says this.
You've been troubled for a while now. Is something wrong?
Oh, no, it's just... So, you know how we were just talking about your mom? Well, if we assume Yuki-san was created from how you see your mom in your heart, then if you really believed she resented you, Yuki-san should resent you too, right? But Yuki-san didn't give me that impression. So, I guess what I'm saying is... I don't think your mom resents you. That's all.
She doesn't?
And that's not the kind of thing moms resent their kids for. How do I put this? That's just how it is. I'm sure of it.
Futaba knows what it's like from her own palace to see how a mother who you believe would blame you for their death, even if it's not true, would manifest. And Toshiro's perception of his mother is nothing comparable to how Futaba's mother had manifested in her own palace. It's these kinds of grounding moments that make you realize that the Phantom Thieves, while perhaps they're not the stars of the show on this outing, they still have an incredible amount to offer based on their lived experiences in the metaverse. They aren't new to this, and while they are all in uneasy territory, it's their role to help Toshiro to navigate the metaverse so that hopefully they can all eventually end back up in the real world. If there is anything, though, that I don't overly love in Tactica, it's the Fourth Kingdom. If you even really want to call it that, because all it is the road to kill God, because it's not a Persona game if you don't have to kill some kind of deity. This time around, we have Salami, the manifestation of human desires for self-preservation from the collective unconscious. This thing that weirdly looks like a drum major who shows up right after we defeat the cognitive area and Toshiro's story arc is all but completed. Salami's goal in creating this very self-contained metaverse is to protect the well-being of the general public because it believes that exposing the crimes of Toshiro's father and fiancé will lead to the people no longer trusting the government, which, after everything that happened with Shido, I think he might have missed the boat on this one. You get it? Boat? Because Shido, his palace was a boat. A big boat. Like in the drowned. So once again, a god gives us a good old condescending scolding. We have to go through a bunch of chrome maps and then face each of the 3 previous final bosses of each kingdom. It's fine. There's not much story here after we get an exposition dump from Lavenza, which is nice. You know, the Velvet Room randomly turns into a train because it can. But ultimately, I can't say that this exposition needed to be all in one spot. It might have been nice to have it slowly parsed out throughout the Fourth Kingdom so that progression felt a bit more rewarding instead of having just a big slog of maps just to reach the final boss. Now, while I don't love the appearance of these maps, they are pretty fun and well constructed, so it's not like it's an entirely bad time to get through them. It's just when I was so enraptured by the story, having it come to such a screeching halt just to redefeat the same bosses I've already beaten, but in Chrome, was just tiring. I mean, the thematic relevance of this is certainly not lost on me, with Toshiro being able to overcome his past with his own strength now, instead of just having to rely on everyone else to fight for him. It's fun, it's cool, it's a really great story moment. I just wish they'd done more with that. But this is really my biggest gripe about the game, and that's a pretty good indicator of how much I enjoyed it. Once we actually got to Salami, I thought it was a really fun boss fight. It required just enough thinking that it wasn't boring, the theme was great, and I think that the cinematics were everything that I could have wanted from the game. Which leads us to saying goodbye to Erina, who fully returns to Toshiro since she's his persona in all that. She's not a real physical person. The real Aries still out there. And then we actually get to see how things play out in the real world, with Toshiro denouncing the actions of his father and fiance and getting them in a lot of trouble, while also severely damaging his political reputation in the process. But it also gives us such an incredible amount of closure to one of my favorite stories, which Persona games don't always do. We actually get to see Eri Natsuhara and Toshiro Kasukabe reuniting after having fallen apart after Eri's injury. It's such an incredibly satisfying ending to such a satisfying and self-contained game. And for me, this is what I want from a Persona spin-off of any of the titles. A way for the characters to further build out the world based on their experiences without the game forcibly trying to reinvent the wheel. So while I was against more spin-offs prior to this game coming out, and even to some extent struggling with my feelings about the franchise as a whole, this really helped to highlight why I fell in love with Persona in the first place. And that's because they always give us a new and unique look at the human experience through the eyes of these characters. And so while I think that after Persona 3 Reload, the next installment in the Persona franchise will probably be Persona 6, even if it's not, I'm fully on board with whatever Atlus has in store for us in Persona moving forward. But that'll do it for this week's video, guys, and I want to let you know a little bit more about this giveaway that we're doing for one copy of Persona 5 Tactica. So to enter, all you need to do is make sure that you're subscribed to us on YouTube, follow me on Twitter, and share the video on Twitter, tagging me at ThoughtBubbleYT. That's ThoughtBubbleYT. It should be up on the screen right now, and that's all you need to do to make sure that everything is in order, and we will be announcing the winner on January 6th. I'll be announcing it on Twitter, and I'll DM whoever wins all of the details so that we can make sure that you can get a digital copy of Persona 5 Tactica sent straight to you on the platform of your choosing. I'd also like to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, because it really helps us to be able to make videos like this, and so that we can be able to do more giveaways in the future. And as always, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, a fantastic rest of your week, and why not even a fantastic rest of your month, and we will see you in the next video. Later.